Rahim, Ya Ali Madad. In his Matnavi, the famous 13th century poet and Sufi Jalaluddin Rumi tells us a story about four men traveling together: a Persian, an Arab, a Turk, and a Greek. Someone gives this group a dirham coin, perhaps as alms. The Persian amongst them immediately says that he would like to buy some angur, meaning grapes, with this money. Each of the others also wanted grapes, but used a different name for it from their own languages. Rumi says that this led to them fighting amongst themselves because they did not understand that the different names they were using were actually referring to the same fruit. Now, this is an interesting metaphor for the challenge we face of dealing with the diversity of people that we encounter in our lives. Not just those who speak different languages, but also people of different races, ethnicities, cultures, religions, political affiliations, social status, etc. And what Rumi is telling us is that if we do not understand these differences within the wider context of our common humanity, it can lead to conflict. Of course, the diversity of humans is not something new. We've had different races, ethnicities, languages, religions, etc. for a very long time. But you see, the difference now is that the encounters between the different kinds of people is happening at a much greater level and at a much faster pace than ever before. For instance, take a look at this map of the religious diversity across different nation states. Where you see blue and green, these are parts of the world where there is greater religious diversity amongst the population. And you can see that a significant population of people live amongst people of other faiths. This is also true of ethnic diversity across the world. As you can see in this map here, many countries across Africa, the Middle East, and the Americas are shown here to have ethnically diverse populations. Then there is linguistic diversity depicted on this map here. The darker the shade of green, the more linguistically diverse the population. And this diversity of languages is also reflective of the diversity of cultures and value systems. You see, often values of a society are embedded in their language. I often use this example that in Urdu or Hindi, there are at least three different ways in which one can address someone: tu, tum, and aap. Each of these terms reflects a sense of respect, affection, closeness, etc. So, if you met an older person, usually you would address them as aap, as a mark of respect, because it is part of the value system of that society to treat elders with respect, irrespective of who they may be. So the language has been adapted to enable people to enact this value. This is why I said that linguistic diversity can also reflect a diversity of value systems. The bottom line is that we experience this diversity of people every day and practically everywhere. It is quite possible that I encounter more different types of people in a week than my grandfather would have encountered in his whole lifetime. And so it is important for us to figure out how to deal with this diversity. Now, I say that we need to figure out how to deal with this diversity because, contrary to what you might think, it does not come naturally to us. A few years ago, the Yale psychologist Karen Wynn undertook a study with 6-month-old babies to determine if we are born with any biases. Let me tell you about their methodology and the results of their study. Now, first, they offered 2 different kinds of cereals, graham crackers and Cheerios, to each of the babies. Each baby indicated a preference for one cereal over the other. Then the babies were shown puppets pretending to eat one or the other cereal. When given the choice between the puppets, and as one would expect, a significant majority of the babies chose the puppet which liked the same cereal as they did. Then the babies were shown a puppet show in which one of the puppets was being helped by one of the other puppets and then mistreated by another puppet. The puppet being mistreated was the same one which was shown to the baby earlier to have a preference for a cereal different from the one the baby liked. When given the choice between these 2 puppets, the helpful puppet and the bad puppet, who was mistreating another puppet, guess which one the babies preferred? More than 87% of the babies preferred the puppet who was mistreating the other puppet. In other words, the babies wanted the puppet who liked a different cereal and in this sense was different from them to be mistreated. So not only do we seem to be born with a preference for those who are like us, but we also seem to be born with a bias against those who are different from us. Surprised? Well, when I first came across this study, I did not expect this result. How is it possible that human beings are born as little bigots? But if you think about it, during early human history, someone who did not belong to your group was seen as a threat to your food supply or your safety. So evolution has predisposed us to be wary of people who are different from us. It seems that a bias to favor the self, meaning people who look like me or think like me or have the same taste as me, is hardwired into our brains. And this bias comes to the fore, particularly in times of stress, in times where there is greater competition for limited resources. We have seen this recently, for instance, in the rejection of refugees fleeing a war or famine, asking people who look different to go home, demands to build walls to keep others out. These are all, in part at least, a reflection of rejection of diversity. Of course, we know that there are economic and political factors involved here, but the rejection of diversity is certainly a factor. The way in which the other is dehumanized, their suffering is minimized as collateral damage. Their lives are deemed to be worth less than the lives of those who are like us. Now, these are all signs of rejection of diversity. And this is not limited simply to situations of competition for scarce resources. Take a look at these maps. There are significant parts of the world where people do not want their neighbors to be from another race. Then there are parts of the world where foreign visitors are not welcomed, even though they might bring much needed business, jobs, investments, etc. This rejection of diversity is a significant issue in the Muslim world as well. A few years ago, there was a survey conducted by the Pew Research Center across 39 countries, each of which had a population of more than 10 million Muslims. They interviewed about 35,000 Muslims across these countries. What they found was that a majority of Muslims in 32 out of those 39 countries believe that there is only one true interpretation of Islam, which is usually their own interpretation. So all other Muslims who differ from them are either misguided or worse, kafirs. Dr. Mahathir Mohamad of Malaysia once said that so many fatwas of takfir have been made by Muslims against other Muslims that we hardly have any Muslims left. I'm reminded of a conversation with another Muslim that I had who was not an Ismaili, during which he said something to the effect that he is glad to see that the Imam is bringing the Ismailis closer to Islam. Now, historically and doctrinally, that makes no sense because Ismailis are by definition Muslims. So to say that we are coming closer to Islam is to suggest that we are somehow outside of Islam. I remember asking him, which Islam does he think we are coming closer to? The Saudi version, the Iranian version, the Pakistani version, or the Indonesian version? Because they are all very different. He didn't know what to say, perhaps because he believed that all Muslims are the same. This notion that all 1.8 billion Muslims believe and practice in the same way is not only incorrect, but it is also intellectually uncouth. But this too is a reflection of the rejection of diversity. That is why society, through education and parental nurturing, needs to intervene to correct this inherent bias and to teach us, particularly the young of our society, how to deal with the diversity of people around us. And the value that Maulana Hazar Imam has been promoting in this regard, both within and beyond the Jamaat, is that of pluralism. Now, ever since the Imam has used this term in his speeches and farmans, this has become a buzzword in our Jamaat. I have even heard many people use the words diversity and pluralism as synonyms, as if they mean the same thing. And actually, they don't. Diversity simply means difference. It is a fact. Diversity exists in all aspects of our lives: culture, languages, politics, religion, etc. The question is whether one recognizes, tolerates, accepts, celebrates, or rejects this diversity. The act of affirming and accepting diversity is what is called pluralism. It is the idea of seeing a positive value in the difference we see around us. According to the Harvard professor Diana Eck, pluralism is not an ideology, not a leftist scheme, and not a free-form relativism. It is not just another word for diversity. It goes beyond mere plurality or diversity to active engagement with that plurality. Pluralism is the dynamic process through which we engage with one another in and through our very deepest differences. It does not displace or eliminate deep religious commitments or secular commitments for that matter. It is rather the encounter of commitments. Such dialogue is aimed not at achieving agreement, but at achieving relationship. She goes on to say that finally, the process of pluralism is never complete, but is the ongoing work of each generation. It is important to note that pluralism is a reason-based response to diversity in our modern societies. It is not a religion-based value, although we can certainly find grounding for it in most religious traditions. One implication of this is that pluralism can be universally applicable value. Recognizing the need for the inculcation of this value in societies across the world, the Ismaili Imamate, in collaboration with the Government of Canada, established the Global Centre for Pluralism. This is a major response to the challenge of living together peacefully and productively in diverse societies. And it is producing a number of resources and programs to explain and promote the value of pluralism. Here is a short clip from one of the videos produced by the GCP.
Identifying in pluralism is one of the most important things. Identifying with the other. Identifying with that person who is not you and who would never be you because they may be another color, another race, another religion, have other cultural values. That recognition that they are they and you are you is terribly important, and that is the basis of pluralism.
Very simply, I think pluralism is the right to be different. We live in a diverse world. Not everybody is the same. Somebody once said, if two people are exactly the same, one of them is irrelevant. And so there's beauty and strength, I think, in diversity, and the right to be different and the celebration of being different is what pluralism is all about.
So, identifying with the other and recognizing the right of the others to be different is the basis of pluralism. But this does not mean that we ignore or seek to minimize the differences just to reach some sort of superficial accommodation. Someone recently said to me that if you truly believed in pluralism, you would not be talking about diversity. Perhaps what he meant was that we would not be concerned about diversity. That is true. But pluralism does not mean not being able to see the differences. It does not mean compromising one's own identity to become more palatable to the other. I think Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi put it best when he said, "I do not want my house to be walled in on all sides and my windows to be stuffed. I want the cultures of all lands to be blown about my house as freely as possible, but I refuse to be blown off my feet by any. I refuse to live in other people's houses as an interloper, a beggar, or a slave." Now, that's the spirit of pluralism. Welcoming diversity, but maintaining one's own uniqueness within the common humanity that we all share. Now, here I want to speak of an important idea that is often overlooked: the difference between truth and fact. In our everyday language, we use these two words interchangeably. But I think it is important here to understand the difference between truth and fact. You see, facts are objective. and the same for everyone. They usually have a scientific basis. So, for instance, it is a fact that the sun is hot. This is not a matter of personal opinion, and no rational person can deny this fact. Of course, what we consider fact today might change over time as science and our understanding of the universe advances. In this sense, facts are falsifiable. But at a given point in time, there is usually a consensus on facts. Truths, on the other hand, are usually personal. Sometimes they are shared with others, but they are subjective and therefore not falsifiable. Someone presented an interesting example of this by saying that his mother is the best cook. And for him, this was not just an opinion, but an absolute truth. Of course, I might not agree with that, but that does not mean that his truth is any less true. Also, for his truth to be true does not necessarily mean that all other mothers are poor cooks. Religious truths are similar in nature. They are true for those who are believers in that religion. For their truths to be true, others don't have to be wrong or false. This understanding is crucial for us to imbibe the spirit of pluralism. At the inauguration of the international headquarters of the Global Center for Pluralism in Ottawa, Maulana Hazar Imam articulated the thrust of this idea in the following extract of his remarks.
Let me emphasize a point about the concept of pluralism that is sometimes misunderstood. Connection does not necessarily mean agreement. It does not mean that we want to eliminate our differences or erase our distinctions. Far from it. What it does mean is that we connect with one another in order to learn from one another and to build our future together. Pluralism does not mean the elimination of difference, but the embrace of difference. Genuine pluralism understands that diversity does not weaken a society, it strengthens it. In an ever-shrinking, ever more diverse world, a genuine sense of pluralism is the indispensable foundation for human peace.
Finally, let me just say that every concept has its limits of applicability. Imbibing the value of pluralism does not mean that everything is acceptable. For instance, in the spirit of pluralism, we don't have to tolerate undemocratic, illiberal, and inegalitarian political ideologies. Similarly, there might be some who might think that human slavery is okay in their ethical framework. But even if we are welcoming of diverse ethical standpoints, we must refuse to accept this stance. The question is, how do we draw the boundaries? Maulana Hazar Imam provided the following response to this question. He said, I think that the periods and the societies which have considered pluralism as a value can be useful examples to develop a cosmopolitan ethic, a concept which could give birth to a civil society based on the principle of merit and capable of integrating the best values of the different units of which it is composed. This would be, in my opinion, the only way to understand pluralism and to build upon it in any place in the world, a real democracy. Integrating the best values of the different units that make up the society. This is one element of what is called a cosmopolitan ethic. Now, of course, there is much more that one can say about this concept of cosmopolitan ethics, but we will leave that for another time. Thank you for listening to this talk. Ya Ali Madad.